We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
It was 1:47 a.m. There were no eyewitnesses, no cell phone trail, no GPS breadcrumb to explain what unfolded inside Nancy Guthrie's Tucson home. But investigators say one silent witness was there for every second of it, the device implanted in her chest. According to the account, Nancy's pacemaker captured the story in real time, logging a sudden surge in her heartbeat, then a growing irregularity, and finally the last readable moments before the signal went dark. Federal investigators have reportedly spent months examining that data, and what it appears to reveal has turned this case into something far more unsettling than a simple disappearance. Once you grasp what that cardiac record may show, the case takes on an entirely different shape. The argument here is that Nancy's own body preserved a timeline no human could have provided, with every critical change stamped and stored by the device meant to protect her heart. And if that interpretation is correct, then the most revealing evidence in the investigation has not come from a camera, a neighbor, or a witness statement. It has been inside Nancy herself all along. Before the technical details take over, it is important to remember who Nancy Guthrie is. She is 84 years old, the mother of Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie and Annie Guthrie, who lives only a few miles away in Tucson. Nancy was never a public figure and never tried to be. She was known, instead, as a private woman who built a quiet life over decades, raising her children largely on her own after her husband's sudden death in 1988. Her world was centered on family, church, gardening, and the familiar calm of evenings spent on the porch in the Catalina foothills. On the night of January 31st, Nancy had dinner with Annie. Afterward, Annie drove her home. She went inside, and hours later, at 1:47 in the morning, everything allegedly shifted. Nancy has now been missing for more than 90 days, and the theory presented here is that the pacemaker in her chest recorded the critical window of what happened. Much of the public discussion around this case has focused on only half the story of what a pacemaker does. Most people think of it as a medical device that keeps a heart on rhythm, and that is true, but modern implanted cardiac devices do much more. They also function as detailed data logs. Heartbeats, rhythm disturbances, sudden spikes, significant drops, and other major physical changes can all be recorded. Some models also contain motion sensors capable of distinguishing between voluntary movement and passive transport. In this telling, Nancy's device had that capability, and it was also linked to a home monitoring unit in her bedroom that routinely transmitted data to a secure remote system. That remote data, according to the narrative, was obtained by federal investigators soon after Nancy vanished. What they reportedly found became the backbone of the case. The first key point begins outside the home. At 1:47 a.m., a doorbell camera allegedly captured a masked person dressed in black, slim in build, gloved, and carrying two bags as they approached the property. Moments later, the camera feed went dark. That, we are told, was the final outside visual from the house that night. The second point is where the case becomes especially chilling. At the same time the camera was disabled, Nancy's pacemaker reportedly registered a sudden and dramatic cardiac spike. Not a slow rise consistent with waking up, but an abrupt reaction that specialists reportedly associate with acute fear. In other words, the timeline suggests the camera went dark at the exact moment Nancy's body registered terror. If that interpretation is accurate, then the final seconds of video and the first seconds of her cardiac event are part of the same moment. Investigators, according to this version, laid the records side by side. Just before 1:47, the front door sensor detected motion. Seconds later, the camera started recording. An unknown man appeared. Then Nancy's pacemaker logged a major cardiac event, with a sharp rise in heart rate and an irregular rhythm. Shortly after, the suspect left the frame and the camera was disabled. Then, at 2:28 a.m., the pacemaker's connection to the home monitoring unit stopped entirely. That created a 41-minute stretch with no exterior video, no phone activity, and no GPS trail, leaving only the pacemaker data to speak for what may have happened next. The rest of the setup also suggests preparation rather than panic. Gloves, bags, timing, and the quiet geography of the Catalina foothills all point, in this retelling, to a deliberate operation. This was not described as a random break-in gone wrong, but as something more calculated. A person arrived with purpose, in a neighborhood quiet enough that someone could move in and out before dawn without attracting attention. And one detail matters above all in this first chapter of the timeline: the cardiac spike indicates Nancy was likely awake when it began. She was not simply asleep and unaware. Her body's reaction suggests she was conscious, alert, and suddenly frightened. That means, in the version of events laid out here, Nancy experienced the beginning of whatever happened that night, and her heart recorded that fact with a precision no witness could ever match. If Nancy was awake when the ordeal began, there were no eyewitnesses, data makes the no picture even more disturbing. No GPS breadcrumb to explain what unfolded inside Nancy Guthrie's Tucson presented here did not. But investigators say one silent witness in an ordinary startle reaction of it, the body device implanted and slowly returns to normal. According to the account, that is not what is claimed Nancy's to have happened in this captured case. The story in real time. Instead, logging a sudden surge in her heartbeat, elevated, then a growing with irregular patterns associated and finally with the last readable moments before the signal went dark. The message investigators have reportedly spent months examining that data, Nancy at and what it appears to reveal has turned this case into something far more unsettling than a simple disappearance. That sustained pattern is presented as powerful evidence that Nancy was not simply startled by a noise and then reassured moments later. The argument here is that Nancy's own body in the presence of danger no human could have provided, and that with every critical change the physiological signature of ongoing fear. Her heart. In other words, and if that interpretation never returned to calm, then the most revealing evidence in the investigation has not come from a camera, a neighbor, or a witness statement. Roughly 15 to 20 minutes into that 41-minute window, the device's motion sensor reportedly showed a different kind of activity. It is important to remember modern implanted devices with accelerometers can distinguish the pattern of someone walking on their own from the passive movement of someone being carried or transported. Who lives only a few miles away in Tucson. In Nancy's case, the movement Nancy was never a public figure and never tried to be self-directed motion. She was known as passive transport. As a private woman who built a quiet life over decades, she was not raising her children largely on her own. She was being moved by someone else in 1988. According to the theory laid out here, centered on the character and duration of that movement point and the familiar especially alarming scenario on the porch in the Catalina foothills. Nancy was allegedly carried on the night of January 31st and driven away. Nancy had dinner with Annie. No witness saw it. Afterward, no camera captured it after the feed went dark. She went the device in her chest, and hours later recorded the transition from house to vehicle. Everything allegedly shifted. That detail, if true, Nancy has now been missing for more than 90 days, and the theory presented here is that the pacemaker in her chest. The most alarming portion of the medical analysis comes in the final 10 to 15 minutes before the home monitor has focused on only half the story of what a pacemaker does. During that period, most people think of it as a medical device that keeps a heart on rhythm, and that is true. But modern implanted cardiac heart rate variability is said to have dropped in a way that specialists associate with suppressed central nervous system function, rhythm disturbances. In simpler terms, spikes, the argument is that her body began showing signs of pharmacological sedation. Some models also contain motion that altered her awareness in distinguishing between voluntary signal from the bedroom monitor was lost. In this telling, Nancy's device had that capability, and it was also linked to a home monitoring unit in her bedroom producing a rapid and recognizable cardiac signature system. Would not fit the profile of a spontaneous intruder. According to the narrative, was obtained by federal investigators soon after Nancy vanished. Access. What they reportedly found became the backbone of the case. Whoever did this, according to the case, begins outside not improvise. At 1:47 a.m., a doorbell camera allegedly captured a masked woman dressed in black in the middle of the night, and outside the view of the disabled camera as they approached the property. Investigators, moments later, in this camera feed would draw three major conclusions from that finding. We are told, was the final outside visual from the house that night. The second point is where the case becomes either had direct access to medical-grade sedatives. At the same time, the camera was disabled through a clinical Nancy's pacemaker reportedly registered a sudden and dramatic cardiac spike. Third, the pattern may narrow the list of possible substances with waking up, and narrowing the substance narrows the universe of people reportedly associate with acute fear. That, in theory, other words, could bring detectives much closer to the camera went dark at the exact moment. There is also a major distinction that has reportedly been misunderstood. If that interpretation is accurate, then the final seconds of video and the pacemaker itself did not stop, and Nancy's heart did not stop. Investigators, what ended was the wireless sync between the implanted device and the base unit in her bedroom. Just before 1:47, the front door sensor detected motion. The most likely explanation offered seconds later is that Nancy had been taken far enough away from the home for the unknown man appeared. or that the monitoring
Then
unit
Nancy's
was disabled.
pacemaker logged a major cardiac
Either way,
event.
the final
with a
reading
sharp
is
rise in heart
described as a
rate and
sedated
an
but
irregular
functioning
rhythm.
heart, not cardiac
Shortly
arrest.
after, the suspect left
That
the
means
frame and
Nancy
the camera was
in all
disabled.
likelihood, still alive
Then,
when the
at
connection
2:28
ended.
a.m.,
The pacemaker's
pacemaker,
connection to the
with
home
years of
monitoring
battery
unit
life
still
still
remaining
entirely,
would have continued working
that created
long
a
after that
41-minute
final
stretch with
transmission.
no exterior video,
And that
no
leads
phone
to one of the
activity,
most haunting
and no
ideas in the
GPS
entire
trail,
case,
leaving only
if
the
Nancy is
pacemaker
found,
data to speak
the
for
device
what may
inside
have
her
happened
chest
next.
may still contain an internal
The rest of the setup
physiological
also
record of
suggests
everything that
preparation
happened
rather
after
than panic.
2:28 a.m. Gloves,
Every
bags,
change,
timing,
every spike,
and the quiet
every
geography
lull,
of
every
the Catalina
clue her body could
foothills
preserve
may
may
still be
in this
stored there,
retelling,
waiting
to
to
a
be
deliberate
read.
operation.
This was not described as a random break-in gone wrong, but as something more calculated. A person arrived with purpose, in a neighborhood quiet enough that someone could move in and out before dawn without attracting attention. And one detail matters above all in this first chapter of the timeline: the cardiac spike indicates Nancy was likely awake when it began. She was not simply asleep and unaware. Her body's reaction suggests she was conscious, alert, and suddenly frightened. That means, in the version of events laid out here, Nancy experienced the beginning of whatever happened that night, and her heart recorded that fact with a precision no witness could ever match.